Hey everybody, this is Latanya LT of First Gen and Juice, and I'm so excited for this conversation today with my new friend Camilla of Rise First, and we are talking about all things First Gen in Philadelphia and pop culture because the city of Philadelphia is having a moment, and I just want to say before I introduce Camilla, we planned this conversation months ago before the Eagles made it
Yes,
to. I think, in fact, I think Jalen Hurts was still hurt when you and I first met and we're talking. But Camilla, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for
And
having me.
you are in the city today.
Yes, I'm in Philly.
Well, I wanted to well, let me set the tone a little bit more. So here on First Gen and Juice, we are very interested in all things about first gens and popular culture, TV, podcasts, movies, etc. Just sort of how we get represented in mass media. And you and I met last year, and you were let me know that you were a Philadelphia native, and we just got to talking about some pop culture things. And one of the things I wanted to ask you actually is go all the way back, Camilla. I know you're in the city right now, but tell us a bit about your Philadelphia origin story or your earliest memories of the city. Either way you want to approach it.
Sounds good. So my story goes back to Uzbekistan, where I was born in Central Asia. And in 2003, my family won a green card lottery to come to the US with a green card. And so that was my first impression of Philadelphia, of America, was just, wow, it's this place that so many people want to go, and I get to be here. And I was taking it all in as a 7-year-old. That was a long time ago. But I remember having certain first impressions, like having cereal for the first time. That's not really a thing in Central Asia. That's like a memory that stuck out in my head. Um, a lot of a lot of firsts, I guess. I started school at Ronhurst Elementary in Northeast Philly. And fun fact about Philadelphia, the reason my family decided to go, of all places, to Philly, is there's a huge diaspora of Central Asians in Northeast Philly.
I had no idea.
Fun fact, it's one of the few cities where there's just this giant concentration of both former Soviet republics, so Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan,
Wow.
um, just all the stands. It's funny because locally we call it Northeastan, because there's so many Central Asian countries or cultures represented there in Philly, and that's one of the only places you can go and try the food. So highly recommend to go to Northeast Philly, try some plof if you're ever in the area.
I love
It's
it.
like a unique, underrated part of Philadelphia that I feel like most folks don't know about. So that's where my journey started in Philly, and I grew up there, went through second grade to 12th, all Philly public schools, and I eventually got to college also in Philly, in my
Okay, we're
backyard.
going we're gonna talk about that.
Yep. And that's where my journey ended. I eventually moved to San Francisco for my first job, and then moved to Austin, where I live technically now, even though I still spend time here in Philly.
Um, Thank you for that context. I think it's really important. I got a few follow-up questions. One, what was your favorite cereal? You mentioned that. Do you remember?
I loved Honey Bunches of Oats.
Honey
I feel like that's not a cool kid cereal, but
it's not Trix or Lucky Charms.
no, yeah. Um, I thought it was amazing.
Yeah,
I still love it to
to
this
this
day.
day.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I want to talk a little bit more about the city of Philadelphia. Oh, by the way, I see you're representing your Eagles today.
Yep.
like I told you before, as a self-respecting Cowboys fan, I can't do that. But I am representing for the Sixers. Well, not really the Sixers, because I'm not a Sixers fan either. But for Allen Iverson,
Okay,
so
okay.
I kept the theme. I kept it on theme. You know,
Okay, good.
I've been like posting on our Facebook group asking people about like Philadelphia, like what do they associate with Philadelphia? Because Philadelphia is a really interesting city, and love to just get your take on this. Typically, when sort of urban cities are represented in a movie, it's New York, right, or LA, and they represent very sort of distinct things. When Philadelphia shows up in mass media pop culture, I feel like for number one, there's not enough known about the city. And then number two, I feel like there's some other kind of point that's being made because otherwise people would default to New York, right? As though New York represents everything. What are your thoughts about that? About sort of what Philadelphia represents? I guess what I'm asking is like, what do you think it represents in like people's imagination?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Because being from there, for me,
Yeah.
it's really hard sometimes to delineate, what makes Philly uniquely Philly versus, like you
Mm,
said, New York, LA,
mm-hmm.
um, other urban areas. And I want to preface by saying, I think it's in my head a little bit ironic that I'm on this show talking about Philly culture because
Why?
I feel like in my friend group, a lot of times my identity is to be the less cultured one because I feel like I missed in my early childhood days a lot of pop culture references. And that just
Ah.
kind of became like my identity, mixed with me having a bad memory. So when people say, "Do you remember that scene in, Fresh Prince or It's Always Sunny?" No, I don't remember
You're
scenes.
like, no.
I can't quote anything from any movie.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I guess I just gave myself this identity of, oh, I'm not really that cultured.
Mm-hmm.
But as I grow older, I start to realize, um, I think the most distinctly Philly thing that I've noticed that other people have noticed about
Yeah.
me, for example, is
Yeah.
my attitude. And living in Texas, living in the South, I think my directness in my attitude and I,
Mm.
I tend to be straight to the point.
Yeah.
Um, that I didn't notice that was not normal until I moved to Texas, and people told me that my Philly is showing. And I think most recently, Philly was named the rudest city in the country, and
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
so so to answer your question, I think the Philly realness maybe is
Mm.
what Philly most recently has been
Mm-hmm.
known for, or at least in my personal experiences. Um, and in terms of pop culture references and representation and wider media, I think the recent TV shows, right?
Yeah.
Abbott Elementary and
Yeah.
Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. All these shows that people that came to my college from out of town would always reference and say,
Yeah.
"Oh, I thought Philadelphia would be this," or "I thought Philadelphia would be that," based on, what they saw in those shows.
Okay, what did they think it was gonna be?
Great question.
Like,
Uh,
probably, I mean, the shows you mentioned, well, Abbott Elementary, that's newer, right? But when we're looking at, would you say Fresh Prince or Rocky? Of course, that's another iconic one.
mhm.
I'm sure they imagined something like very urban,
Yeah, I was maybe like gritty. Um,
gritty. Uh-huh.
where it is, I feel like that's how it's represented.
Mm-hmm.
Um, really urban. Yeah. And I think some parts of Philly still kind of reflect that, but Philly is also evolving a lot as a city. It's, like gentrifying so much in recent
Yeah.
years since
It's
I
just like
graduated
any
college.
city.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
So I guess that's probably what people imagine versus when they come and they visit and the downtown is renovated and it's like, oh, this
Hmm.
is so nice.
They're like, oh, it's nice here.
But
So
then you
sad.
then you like meet people on the street and then you get the Philly realness, which hasn't gone away.
We'll say it's nuanced. That's what we'll say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned experiencing a number of firsts, especially when you came to the States. And I know you identify as a first generation college graduate and now professional. Can you remember a time when you realized you were first gen to college? Did you have an epiphany, or would it have been more like a slow sort of realization?
Um, I was aware of it pretty young because in
Mm,
during high school, I was tapped to be a part of Philadelphia Futures, which is a pipeline program that helps urban Philly public high school kids get to college.
mm,
And so before that moment, I didn't
yeah.
realize anything was unique about me because my high school was filled with first gens and it was an extremely diverse public high school, and I very much felt like every other kid there. I didn't notice
Okay.
anything different.
Yeah.
But when I was tapped for Philadelphia Futures, they kind of walked me through the entire process of applying to college.
Okay.
I think that's when I realized,
Oh,
oh, I didn't realize this was so complicated or that I needed a dedicated counselor
wow.
to get there. Because in my high school, Philly Northeast High School, biggest Philly public high school, 3,500 students, we had one guidance counselor for college.
No.
Yeah. So,
No.
I didn't think much of it. We had, college prep assemblies, but no one got the one-on-one guidance into, what do you need to do or know to get into college. Um, but thankfully to Philly Futures, you know, I I was helped through that process and I learned a ton. And
Wow.
I think that's when I first realized I was first gen. But when I got to college, I had the biggest reality check of being first gen,
Okay.
the actual real one.
Okay. Hold on to that one. Hold on to that.
Okay.
Um, yes, we will get there. Why do you think you were tapped for this program?
That's a really good question. I felt really lucky because at that time it was only three of us that were invited.
No. Are you serious?
Yeah, so the reason why
It's a citywide thing.
it's a citywide program, but
What?
the program starts your freshman year. And so that's when so usually eighth grade is when they take applications, and the program starts your freshman year of high school. That year, so the program does occasional like college prep summer courses, and that's what they were doing in my high school. Um, they came to Northeast, offered this college prep course for 2 weeks. And out of that class, they chose three students to join off cycle. So that's why it was only three. It was off cycle. We joined just for our senior year to participate. Um,
Oh,
I
you were all the way into your senior year.
I was already, yeah, I was done with
What?
senior year. Yeah.
Um, well, one of the things you shared with me about your high school is that actor Tony Danza was a teacher there. I remember I'll never forget this because remember my mind was blown. I was like, what? I had never heard of this before. Um, Thankfully, I was able to watch like a episode or two.
Nice.
Yeah. So I want to hear your perspective. What grade were you in when he was there? What did you think about this? One interesting thing about Tony Danza that was mentioned in the show is that he himself was first gen. He's from
Mhm.
Brooklyn, and he says he was the first in his family to go to college. I'd love to hear anything you want to share about that experience.
Yeah. So when the show was filmed, I was actually in eighth grade at the middle school down the street from Northeast. And um, when I started high school, he was still a presence in the school.
Oh,
So I got to see the things like camera crews being around the high school. It was my neighborhood, right?
okay.
Um, I knew the kids that were in the show, so still weird to look back and see snippets of the show and be like, I know those kids. But I thought it was really cool. Honestly, it put Northeast on the map, and you see scenes of our classrooms. Even though we know that they staged that classroom to be the nicest, cleanest, they put in carpets. We knew that was the Tony Danza room.
What? They fixed it up?
They fixed it up for
Uh,
TV.
okay. Of
Um,
course they did. Why am I surprised?
and yeah, the producers apparently air conditioned our library, which wasn't air conditioned before. So that was like a really cool addition to the high school that still stands today.
Okay.
And Tony Danza started our annual talent shows, which when I started high school,
Oh,
that was a normal thing, and he actually hosted them. Um, but to my earlier point about being uncultured, I didn't know who Tony Danza was.
well,
So to me, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. I was
he's
like,
more
okay,
like my generation. You know what I mean? So yeah, and that was
yeah,
part of the show too. People
generational
like,
gap.
I don't know who he is.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. We weren't as starstruck as the teachers.
That makes sense. That makes
Yeah.
total sense. Yeah. What was his reputation like? Did you hear anything about him as a teacher?
Um, I didn't hear directly, but I remember reading that he had he had good reviews from other teachers. He was really genuinely like had a genuine interest in the students. That's
That's
actually
good.
part of the reason why the show got cut short is he refused to let the network stir up drama
That's really good.
students, and he was really committed. Even after they stopped rolling, he finished out the year and taught the rest of the class.
Oh, that's so okay. All right, Tony. I'm impressed with that. Okay.
Yeah, and he wrote a really cool memoir afterwards. I apologize to every teacher I've ever had because it like that experience gave him the perspective and the admiration for, teaching and how hard that is at a high school like mine, but probably all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I totally resonate with that. And I think I hope that show started an important conversation.
I hope so.
Yep.
I did a little research. From what I could find, Tony actually trained with Teach for America. Have you heard something similar?
Oh, I don't know too much about Teach for America, but that
Okay.
sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was going to ask if you know of other teachers, um, any teachers from the high school that also went through Teach for America. What I know about about TFA is that like the goal is to place people in the toughest schools, and so it makes sense that Philadelphia. It's like
Mhm.
Philly, Baltimore, Detroit, right?
Yep, yep.
Is that resonating with you?
Yeah, that sounds right. I think there's a reason they chose Northeast Philly.
Mm,
Um, I think the theme of grit, as like we talked about before,
yeah.
probably part of the reason they chose my high school. And I do remember some teachers that had gone through TFA, but I actually, even to this day, didn't know too much about TFA.
Okay.
I think that's a great mission though, because I know at Northeast we had an extremely high turnover rate with teachers.
Did you think it was a tough high school?
I Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
There were moments where, like, again, I feel like everything is perspective. I didn't realize it was weird until later in life, but there were classes where the teachers spend most of the class time babysitting us or trying to get the class to, you know, settle down and calm down enough to teach something. So like class wasn't always learning, if that makes sense. And I remember
Totally.
even then feeling like a lot of sympathy for the teachers that we had. having, really difficult students, or, a lot of times walking out of school was a big thing, and they had to prevent that. We had uniforms for the sole purpose to like contain the student body.
Wait,
So,
what do you mean?
to it's like a behavioral thing, I think. So
Oh,
people don't really express themselves. They're there at
oh,
school in uniforms,
okay.
like
Interesting.
I feel like the uniforms weren't, I don't know, a nice thing, or,
Hmm.
because we had money we could spend on uniforms. No, we had to actually spend a lot of money on uniforms, but it was like I think a behavioral tactic, if I'm not correct.
That's deep.
Yeah. We
Do
had other
you?
high schools in Philly that would have like just let students wear whatever, but apparently that like opens up for more disruption in class.
Wow. At least according to administrators.
Yeah.
Uh, do you know if your parents ever considered sending you anywhere else? Was that ever talked about or ever an option or not? That's just where you went?
It it was an option that we knew. So I don't know if other school systems do this, but in 8th grade, there's like a high school application process similar to college applications where you pick where you want to go to school. Certain people go to magnet schools. Um, it,
Exactly.
it wasn't an option for me because my parents didn't want me to go too far away. This high school I could walk to,
Mm-hmm.
but my parents didn't want me to take, for example, public transportation when it got dark.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just was not a question of where I went to
Okay.
high school at that point. Things changed with my siblings, so they went off, and now my brother takes 3 forms of transportation to get to his magnet high school. Because now I did everything first. Now
See?
my parents they're like, okay, cool, take the bus, train, whatever, just get
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Yeah. The oldest is usually the guinea pig.
I was.
They're like, "Oh, you turned out fine."
Yeah, yeah.
So you made it all the way to senior year before even being involved in Philadelphia Futures. What schools were you like, what was your thought process in terms of going to college? Did you want to go away? Did you want to stay local? What was that like for you?
Yeah. Um, for the longest time, I would say like maybe my first 2 years of high school, I didn't think much of college except for that I knew I had to get good grades to get
Okay.
there. Um, but this is actually a graduation speech I gave for my communication program.
What?
Pop culture led me to my college. So basically what happened was I was a huge fan of Gossip Girl, and it was airing at that time when I
Oh
was
my
in high
God.
school,
I
and I would
love
watch
it.
every single time it was on. I think it was like CW. Every time it aired, I was watching the latest Gossip Girl, and there was one episode where Blair and Serena, who are best friends, tied at the hip, had like they went at it and had the tiff about college and getting into Brown.
Okay.
And to me, that was so bizarre. I had no idea what they were talking about. And this was my first exposure to, I guess, Ivy League institutions.
This is amazing, Camilla. Keep going.
So that night or sometime close to that episode, I went on the internet, and back then College Confidential was a huge thing.
Oh my
I
gosh.
remember College Confidential.
Yes, yes.
In retrospect, probably a toxic forum full of just the biggest tryhards ever.
Yeah, and anxiety but yes, I
So
do remember
anxiety
this.
inducing. Yep.
Yes.
But I was learning. I was like, what? I remember what is an Ivy League universe?
Oh,
Like trying to learn what is
oh,
going on.
baby Camilla. Oh.
I know. Yeah, and those College Confidential forums basically created the formula in my head. Um, from everything I read, it's the parents comparing SAT scores and GPA and their full resume of their leadership position.
Yes.
And to me, that created the script in my head for what I needed for college.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, naturally, everyone in College Confidential wants to go to an Ivy League university, so I'm gonna go to an Ivy League university.
Oh my God. This story is amazing.
Yeah.
And
Um,
so where did you, and do you mind sharing where you applied?
so because of Gossip Girl, I really wanted to go to Yale.
To Yale? Okay, okay, I didn't watch Gossip Girl, so you're gonna have to tell me. Did
So
they? So the characters went to Yale?
so the characters ended up splitting and going to different universities.
Oh,
One went
okay.
to Brown, one went to Yale, and my favorite character went to Yale. So
This is
naturally,
amazing. No,
naturally, as a teenager, I decided my college based on where
of
the
course.
fictional character went.
Well, this is why we have First Gen and Juice to acknowledge like the influence of pop culture, right? And if we just keep showing Ivy League schools over and over again, that's what people think, oh, that's what college is, right? But go ahead.
And that's exactly how my my expectations were shaped. Yep. So I ended up applying to, I think it was Yale, Columbia, Princeton, and Penn in my backyard. It was the closest Ivy. But I also, thankfully, to Philadelphia Futures,
Yeah,
they gave me a formula to apply to a few reach schools,
yeah.
a few, I think I'm going to get in schools, and then at least one safety school, which was Community College of Philadelphia. And so I applied to all kinds of universities
Okay, good.
and thank God, because what if I hadn't gotten into any Ivy League university, you know?
Uh-huh.
Um, so I actually got into Penn. That was the only one, the only
Hmm.
Ivy League university I got into. But at that point, I was so happy because I'm really close with my family. We immigrated together as a immediate
Mm,
unit. Um,
mm.
so I was really looking forward to kind of like staying together, living close to my family, but also getting a chance at this crazy great university, which I
It's
think I
amazing.
got into. Thankfully, Philadelphia Futures also was a huge part in me getting into college. Period.
Well, I mean, I'm sure your family was just thrilled, right? Because it's like best of both worlds. You get into an Ivy League school and you're close to home. Um, did you live at home or did you live on campus?
I lived on campus. That was College was a whole other debate. I got into Penn and Drexel, which is a college next door,
Uh-huh.
and Drexel gave me a full scholarship at the time.
Ooh.
And my parents, not knowing anything, they don't know what Ivy League is, even though I learned about it from Gossip Girl. Um, they really wanted me to go to Drexel
Mhm.
because when you go to West Philly, Drexel's campus is so new, so nice, and buildings are just like fancy and shiny and
Okay.
skyscrapers. And then you go to Penn and they're older buildings. And
Mhm.
so my parents are like, why would you want to go to there? Drexel is so
Why do
much
you want to
nicer.
go to this old school? I
Yeah,
love it.
well, Drexel's offering you all the money. Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? And we butt heads over, where should I end up? And then there was the whole living on campus versus living at home situation.
Yeah,
And as an 18-year-old, I really wanted to live on campus.
of course you did.
So I made the case that it would be best for my academics to be closer to classes, and they obliged. Um, I
Now,
guess
what was your financial aid like at Penn?
my financial aid was pretty good at Penn. The,
Okay.
the one thing that's really great about the Ivy Leagues, I guess, as a first gen, is that they have amazing endowments, and the universities have need blind admissions and
Mm,
financial
mhm,
aid. And
mhm.
so, luckily, I had almost a full
Oh,
ride.
okay. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's awesome. Okay, ma'am, you did mention that you felt really first gen when you got the pen. I have my own pen story. I had to do a grad school. Um, I love to hear what that was like for you. I don't think they had first gen initiatives there yet. They've gotten first gen pen or something like that probably
hmm
since you've been there. But what was that like for you?
It was a culture shock, to say the least. Um, Coming from Northeast Philly to Penn was an insane transition because Penn brings in some of the most well-educated students from across the world, not even the country,
Right,
but the
exactly.
entire world.
Right.
Um, and so I had roommates from Hong Kong and Portugal.
Yeah.
And one of my roommates' dad was this famous, like, rich oligarch from Russia. And, like, I arrived there, and at first I'm really pumped,
Okay.
because as an 18-year-old, wow, we're all here on this campus from all over the world, from different backgrounds, and we're all starting on the same in the same place.
Oh, you're
That
so
was
young
my
and innocent.
yeah, yeah. I
Okay,
was
wow.
so excited, my, new student onboarding, trying to branch out, um, and I slowly started to realize it wasn't as fine and dandy and as I expected.
Mm.
Firstly, in social settings, I found it hard to break into some groups.
Oh,
I remember standing in line, um, into one of the onboarding new student orientation events, and there were a group of girls standing in front of me,
okay.
and I was trying to be nice and say hi and, like, "Hey, what's up? What's your name?" And I was stonewalled. And I never experienced anything like that
Whoa.
before. They just, like, face
Froze you out.
expressionless, like, "Well, why is she talking to us?" And I realized later that all those kids had known each other from, like, New York, like, private schools,
Oh.
and they already knew who they wanted to be friends with and socialize with
Before this is
before
freshman year.
they
It's
even got
orientation.
there. Before it was orientation. That was a really jarring experience that it took me a little bit to digest about what just happened,
Oh,
I thought we're all here to, like, for the first time, what's going on? But the real, I guess, reckoning that I had was when I failed my first class
mm,
in in college. It was my second semester, and I had this moment of realization that I had not been set up for success.
woo.
In so many ways, like, looking around, I started to realize a lot of my classmates had tutors that their parents paid for, even in college. They knew all these secrets to getting ahead, like, make sure you form a relationship with your professor,
Mm,
and the Greek life kids had passed on tests from every class from years before, and they knew exactly how to take every single exam because of that information being passed down. They had a stronger foundation in math. For example, I had to take the most elementary math class, and even
mm,
then, kind of struggled. And it's a mix of the Philly public school system not setting me up for success in college to
mhm.
compete with private school kids. Um, and I had this moment of I shouldn't be here, I'm
Oh,
here on a quota. And I still think, thankfully Ben Franklin himself started a quota at Penn for economic opportunities for the surrounding
really?
neighborhoods. Yeah, and so because of him, there's this, legacy that he left to
Oh, the
make
homie Ben.
sure.
He was one of my American heroes. I'm good. I picked a good one.
Yeah, yeah. Because of him, there is a Philly quota at Penn. And so I chalked it up to being like, I don't belong here. And I was seriously considering transferring out and going somewhere where I would think that, I'd be more set up for success.
Yeah.
But the reality is probably that this is probably true all over the country, that students end up in college and are just lost for how to navigate, especially going to under-resourced
Mhm.
public schools, ones they make shows about now as mockumentaries. Uh,
Mhm.
but yeah, that was the big
Camilla,
moment.
that's so deep, my friend. Um, sorry that you had that experience. unfortunately, it is a common experience, though. Um, did you express any of this to your family at all, um, or did you kind of keep it more to yourself?
Um, I didn't express it to my family because I had worked so hard to get there,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it would just upset them and, make them
Mm-hmm.
hurt for me to
Yep.
to understand what I was going through. But luckily enough, Penn had so many resources for me at the time. I was part of a bridge program called PennCap, who was there as a support system. I had a counselor at PennCap that checked in with me regularly. Um, and I had conversations with a career and curriculum counselor within the college that I was registered at. And so everyone, it was a mix of that and friends that kind of just made me uh, believe in myself again and kind of at least told me that I'm doing fine actually and I will get through this. And
Mm.
I'm not the only one. I knew other first gen students and so that helped a lot too that I knew I wasn't alone.
Yeah, that community support is really critical. I know I went through something similar, and when you feel like it's just you, you're like, well, you don't think about the system being broken. You think there's something that you have to fix within yourself. Um,
Yeah.
Thankfully, I would guess I don't know exactly the year IVG was formed, but more recently, I'm seeing more directed support um, at Penn or around Penn or for the Ivy League, but it's also needed everywhere. I appreciate you sharing that story. Um, I know that now you have an opportunity to give back, right? And to sort of help the Camilla you were back then. Can you tell us a bit about Rise First and your role there and what the goals are of the organization?
Of course. You mentioned IVG and that's actually the genesis of Rise First. My senior year,
No way!
my senior year, Penn hosted IVG. And of course, I attended. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Eugenia O, who's now a mentor, but Eugenia O was standing on stage giving a speech about her first gen experience with imagery in such detail that resonated so much with me. And I looked around and there were 800 other students in the
Mm,
room with me, just like clapping and feeling what she was saying. And I thought that was so powerful. But I also met a mentor, Cindy Rentala, at that conference. And when Cindy met us, one of the days of the conference, she kind of sat a couple of us down and said, "Hey, you're students. I want to pass an idea by you and see what you think." And the whole premise was there's a lot of urban high touch programming to help first gen students either get to college or get to their first career, and one of the biggest gaps right now is there are kids in flyover states who don't get the same opportunity as someone
mm.
in Philly, New York, or LA. And there are so many flyover states and cities and schools. And so Cindy's idea was how can we use technology to break that geographical barrier and serve more first gen
I
students
love
across
it.
the country? And myself, always having a little bit of an entrepreneurial edge. I loved it and I wanted to just do whatever it takes. I said, "Yes, Cindy, sign me up." And you know what? Let's start building it. And we did. So that's how Rice first started. We started having a bunch of whiteboarding sessions on campus. It started with mostly a Philly crew, and then we grew. We expanded beyond Penn, beyond Philly. We're always a remote first organization. So
I did not know that.
yeah, we started a website. Our first year curated 1,300 resources all over the internet for first gen specifically
Mhm.
across the United States. And in that process, just searching up first gen programs, we realized how unintuitive and hard to find they were because
Mhm.
we went below the fold. We went, page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6
Right?
on. And
Yeah.
how many times do you ever go beyond the first page on your search? But we really had to. diligently look for these opportunities just to find them. And so that kind of reinforced to us that there was probably a need to curate these things in one place.
Mhm.
And we launched a website. Since then, we've grown to, a LinkedIn community of people who engage and follow with us that we share opportunities out to. We have a newsletter that goes out to subscribers on job opportunities,
Nice.
journal prompts, other kinds of like events going on, things like that. And I would say the biggest impact we've made is the organization is built by and for First Gen. So everyone who's come and built Rise First has grown through the experience. A lot of times, their first real life work experience,
Mm.
um, building out this non-tech nonprofit, and it's been 62 plus people that we've touched over the last 5 years that have been able to build real world skills, but also make an impact on their community through their
That's
Rise First
awesome.
and that's where we got to where we are today. Riceverse is still a curated resource platform, online community, and newsletter for first gen students nationwide.
And are you is it targeting any first gen students or first gen students at specific institutions or locations?
Um, our goal is to reach as many first gen students as possible. And so geographically, just looking at the entire nation, um, as as a small nonprofit, we've always had challenges of how narrow should we be with our mission
Mhm.
versus how impactful can we make it. And so we've gone from wanting to target all first gen students and early professionals to narrowing specifically on a space that we think we can uniquely provide value on, which is first gen college students looking to explore their career.
Love it. Th- So for people who are watching and thinking about social impact and organizations and nonprofits, this is a really important conversation that you can think, I want to touch everyone everywhere. And actually having a focus in a narrow lane, it really will help more, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Thank you for sharing about that, and I hope that this video and this conversation also gives more visibility to Rise First. And like I said, I think it's so awesome that you're able to give back. I've been thinking a lot about sort of legacy lately, and so that is really resonating with me. I actually want to ask you about another topic, sort of subgroup within the first gen community, and that's Asian Americans within who are first gen. And I would argue, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. That population is completely overlooked, partly due to a model minority myth and stereotype, um, and partly because there's sort of like overrepresentation, let's say, of Latinx folks. Again, there's great diversity within the first gen community, of course, but not only not all folks who identify as Latinx are first gen, and not all first gens are Latinx. But I'd love to, if you have any thoughts you want to share about, let's say, specifically Asian American experiences, which is a broad category, but I just want to just offer you an opportunity to comment on it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Um, the model minority myth definitely is like plays a huge part, I feel like, in the I don't know, movement for inclusion and diversity. Um, it's also really interesting how it manifests. And for example, my work is in the tech industry,
Oh, right.
and um, it's it's a really unique industry where it's dominated by white and Asian people, and that's what I experienced
Hmm.
um, when I started working at IBM in San Francisco, and
Mm.
that general tech culture
Hmm.
um,
Speak
is
on it, girl.
really interesting. Um, sorry. So, uh, yeah, I feel like I'm in a unique position where I'm racially ambiguous. I'm half white and half Asian, and I feel like I haven't really been fully stereotyped as Asian or fully stereotyped
Mm,
as white.
mhm,
Um, but I do think in this country, like being Asian is a super unique experience.
mhm,
Um, yeah, it's not as comparable, and I think when you look at the history of Asians, like I think the history is also unique and how a lot of
yeah,
people over here and how a lot of families established their identities through like laundromats and like
mm,
Chinese
mhm,
stores and all of that. I
mhm,
feel like that plays a big part in like Asian or growing up Asian in the US specifically. Um, Actually, I'd like to talk about how being Central Asian is overlooked completely.
yes,
Um,
this is your platform, this is your platform, do it,
I feel like
talk,
it's even within the Asian community, you know, there's a lot of acronyms, and on the census, there's a lot of options. And I'm not a Pacific Islander, and I'm not East Asian, and I'm not South Asian. And a lot of times there's never a choice to
mm,
say, Central Asian. And
mm,
so I find myself in this weird it's even weirder when you can't choose biracial or two or more races. I think it's becoming more normal now. Um, but then if I have to check one, what do I do? Um,
mhm,
but yeah, I feel like my culture hasn't really been celebrated or
yep,
identified as an
mhm,
identity. So I feel this weird I don't really consider myself fully Asian because I haven't
mhm,
fit in with like most Asian diasporas here.
yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Well, it ties back to, I mean, we're having a conversation about representation, right? And what can happen
mhm,
is sort of you don't see yourself in that. You can question your own authenticity, like, oh, am I real? Am I having a real experience? And all experiences are real, right? So, yeah, thank you for your reflection on that for sure. Yeah, one of the things I noticed at my time at UCLA with regard when I was running, sort of overseeing First Gen initiatives, is that Asian American students, and again, super broad category, totally overlooked. It was always assumed that they were coming from privileged backgrounds or had parents who went to college, and absolutely not the case. Like, there's going to be diversity in all communities there.
right. And that's another, I feel like this is a new conversation being had, but there's different forms of diversity. And I think
Hmm.
socioeconomic
Mm,
diversity is coming to the foreground because when I was at Penn, at face value, if you look at the campus,
yeah,
wow, it's so diverse. But in reality, socioeconomically, not really, you
right.
know?
And then for people like you in Northeast Philly, Penn is on the west side, and even the west side itself is very diverse, so yeah, we're talking about in the same city even, right? So there's a lot of range in
Mhm.
between there. And I think it's really funny because for many people who watch Fresh Prince and sing along with the opening song, I mean, it opens with West Philadelphia born and raised. And so people are going to have this sort of, this idea in their minds of what West Philadelphia is. And in that case, it's, well, we'll get into a fight on a basketball court, right? Like it's gangs, but West Philadelphia is more than that.
Yeah. And then you go to Penn's campus and this is where Will
Right?
was no, no, that is not the West Philadelphia
Not that
where
part.
Will was raised.
Well, um, you had mentioned Abbott Elementary earlier. Do you watch that show by any chance?
I've seen a few episodes. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's hilarious. I'm really bad at following through. I watch a lot of shows. Um, but yeah, I think it does a really great job. to depict the life of a teacher trying their hardest
Oh,
at
yeah.
or teachers in plural, right? In a
Mhm.
school district that's extremely mismanaged. And I think that is exactly how I see every teacher I've had in the Philly school district is these shining souls who are doing their best,
Mm,
sometimes dipping into their own money, own
yeah.
funds to ensure that their students, like get what they're supposed to get out of their education.
And what I also love about it, so shout out to Quinta for doing this. So not only showing like the humane side of teaching, but also shining a light on Philadelphia. Like it's so specific. There's so many Philly references, but they are um, depicted with such warmth and love and not like gang violence or something like that. So I just really appreciate that.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's really well done.
Well, listen, before we go, I want to ask, I don't know what you have time for, but are you watching any TV shows now or looking forward to any movies that are coming out? Tell us what's going on in your pop culture life right now, Camilla.
Sure. Funny story is I was just talking to my friends about how I'm trying to consume less media and read more books.
Okay,
um,
good, good. I'm a fan of books.
but I'm trying to be more analog because I think that we're all a little bit overstimulated
Hmm.
in, with media. But I still love to watch TV, and one of the things that I've been looking for in TV is just something lighthearted and funny that doesn't hit too close to home because
Right.
I can't feel that after work.
No tech
Um,
shows.
I mean, even Abbott Elementary, it's such a lighthearted, funny show, but I feel like it stresses me out to
Yeah,
think about the state of the public school system. And
yeah,
I honestly, I think I need to be in a certain frame of mind to watch it,
yeah.
even as on the surface a lighthearted mockumentary. I really liked Ted Lasso
Oh,
because it it just is like a beacon of light
yeah.
and all these shows about like the future and AI. And I really like How I Met Your Father.
Oh, I
So
haven't seen
Hillary
that
Duff,
one.
I grew up watching Hillary Duff, and Lizzie
Oh,
McGuire.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. And she stars as the main character in How I Met Your Father, and it's a show about a woman experiencing dating as a modern millennial, just going through like in the show, she meets her first date from Tinder, and it's just super relatable, but like the lighthearted, and so that's my latest binge. I
I
think it's a
love
great
it.
show.
Well, you'll have to let me know what if you're reading any good books as well. I tend to juggle a lot of books. I have Prince Harry's book on my desk, but I can't get to it right now. I got to be in the right frame of mind for that
Yeah.
one. And I feel like I just started one. I can't remember it right now, but yeah, I got a couple on deck right now.
I have a few recommendations. So, one of my favorite latest books is called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker.
I read that. It was so good.
Such a great book. Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's so important in this moment in, an epidemic of loneliness that we
Mm,
gather more and more intentionally. And
yeah.
I've been really thinking a lot about that recently in my personal.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
I it was I saw it on Facebook. Someone in a Facebook group had mentioned it. And I was like, "What is this?" And it was just it's surprising that someone hasn't written that book before because I was like, "Oh, yes, it makes perfect sense." So, yes, I agree with you. I recommend that one as well.
Yeah. Another one, I'm reading it right now, but I've read it before. It's called You Are Here by Thich Nhat Hanh,
I don't know
and
that one.
the book is just one long meditation about being in the present and embracing the present moment and being here. To my earlier point about being overstimulated,
Mhm.
it's a really great reminder to just breathe and be here for the things and the people that you really care about and your body first and foremost. And I think that's so
I
important, like
love it.
a reminder that we all need, I think.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, Camilla, so it's been a pleasure. I want to thank you for taking the initiative to just tug my little sleeve on LinkedIn, which is how you and I met. I'm such a fan of LinkedIn. Everybody knows this because it allows for things like this to happen. My other friend, Cynthia Cortez, who I also met on LinkedIn, says sometimes it's a matter of sort of putting out in the universe. Um, some things and then you get it back and you find people who are attracted to the similar thing. So I feel the same way about you, and I know that you and our paths will continue to intersect over time. Thank you for talking about your life and your experience in the city of Philadelphia, and I wish you good luck on the game today.
Thank you.
Of
Do you
course.
mean that? But
I
no,
do.
may
I
the
love
best
it.
to you.
Wait,
But
what'd you
thank
say?
you for having me. This is so important. Thank you for I feel like throughout this conversation, I realize myself how important pop culture is, and specifically in the first gen experience. So thank you for shedding a light on it. Thank you for having this platform. I think it's awesome. And I'm so glad we met.
Likewise. Like I said, it won't be the last.